All right, everybody, welcome back to On the Perf podcast, brought to you, as always, by Atlas Gunworks. Because if you're going to be serious about shooting, you should shoot a serious gun. You know what really sucks? When your gun goes click instead of bang. That's no fun. I've had too much of that lately, and I'm pretty much over it. That's why we are switching. With me today, as always, is my good friend, Adam Maxwell. How are you doing, Mr. Maxwell?
I am great. That was a heck of a drop, man. I like that one. Yeah, I think both of us are huddled inside from winter events going on outside. I think we've received about 6 to 8 inches of snow here in the last 48 hours or so. And then
nice.
we're settling in for a good old Wisconsin deep freeze. I think it's going to get 12 below tomorrow for like 1 week, and then it's all going to melt. So,
yeah, people think of Utah as a wintry state, and it is, but it's pretty tropical in the grand scheme of wintry. And at least our wintry stuff, we can do stuff with it. You know, you can go skiing or ice climbing or whatever, where you guys just have to like freeze.
Where the people are, it's pretty mild, and then where the fun is, it's pretty nice.
Solid. Yeah, so basically, we're just going clicky click and snappy snap in the basement because it's dry fire season. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I did shoot a match last weekend. There actually was a match yesterday. I'm recording this on a Sunday, and I opted not to go because early in my shooting days, I used to shoot every match that ever happened. I've shot matches in Sorels, digging mags out of snowdrifts and all of that stuff, and I just don't find that I get any value out of that anymore other than hanging out with my friends, and I can just hang out with my friends at a bar, so I'd just rather do that than go get frostbite on the digits. So today we're going to talk about dry fire. I think the place to start is with a really broad understanding of what dry fire really means to a competition shooter. Because when people think of dry fire, like if you talk to most, what I would consider to be an average shooter, they think dry fire is rack the slide, point the gun at the thing, press the trigger straight back until it goes click, rack the slide again, and repeat. That is not even kind of sort of what we do. Would you say that's a pretty accurate statement you've heard a lot?
I would say yes. I would also say that, like live fire, most people are wasting their time. If you don't really know what you're doing, it's kind of like, I don't know. I mean, it's like going to the gym. Like there's a few people in there who are really getting it and making gains and progressing towards a goal, or they're on a program. Vast majority of people, and I was certainly one of them, they're just kind of going through the motions, or maybe like they downloaded something that they're following along. But like, I remember when I was still a member of Anytime, there was one gal in particular. She would set the treadmill to like max incline, and then she would like hold on to it like it was some kind of reindeer sleigh, and she would just walk for however long it was, and it was like, I mean, yeah, she's working out, but like,
that's better than nothing.
Yeah, but like, what are you doing? And so like, I think, barrier number one is do something. All right. So do something. But then once we get off the fence of doing something, I think there are a lot of people stuck in this middle no man's land of, you're doing something, but are you really being productive with the time you've allocated towards this? And I would say it took me several years to get to a point where dry fire time was not only consistent but also productive, and that's probably what we're more getting at here today.
Yeah, so let's start with just the mechanics of dry fire, because there are a few things that you have to take into account, because not even because the gun doesn't go off when you pull the trigger, but because the gun doesn't cycle when you pull the trigger. So the mechanical things that happen inside of a gun don't happen. So there's essentially got three types of platforms you're working with from a pistol standpoint. I've been dry firing shotgun a bunch. which is kind of a whole thing because shells move when you pull triggers and all kinds of other shenanigans. And we'll get into that. But with pistols, you basically have striker fire pistols, hammer fire single action pistols, and double single pistols. And all of those are going to act a little bit differently in dry fire. I don't really treat striker fire and single action pistols differently. Whenever I'm doing any dry fire anything, whatever the drill is, I'm going to start it with a tensioned striker or a cocked hammer, and I'm going to pull the trigger on the first trigger pull. It's going to drop the hammer or release the firing pin, whatever the case may be, and I'm going to feel that click on the first one. After that, you're going to get essentially a dead trigger. So your trigger is going to move a bit, but I am still releasing as far as I would need to reset, and then pressing with at least enough force to make the gun go off again. But I'm just clicking on a flat surface that no longer is moving with me as I do it, because the gun's not going off, which isn't cycling the slide, which isn't resetting the striker or resetting the hammer. I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. They think that, when I'm dry firing, I need to have the hammer fall. I need to have a sensation of a real trigger press every single time. And you don't. You just don't. Like, I'm telling you, it doesn't matter. When I go to live fire, it feels the same because I'm still putting the same amount of force into a trigger. Would you say that's an accurate statement?
Yeah, I might even go a little bit this way. I think there's kind of three levels of dry fire, that people will progress through.
I feel a crawl, walk, run coming on.
A little bit. It's almost like a tadpole thing, but like I almost picture like driving. Like, a lot of us have our driver's license, right? So like the jump from zero driving experience to driver's ed, I feel like that's kind of that first phase of where like people do things like put a quarter on your slide and press the trigger without it falling off.
Have you ever done that?
Yes. Not for any productive amount of time. I'm like, is this for real? I tried it a few times. But like, so there's like just very rudimentary, figuring out how a gun works. Figuring out how a gun works phase of dry fire. Everyone who owns a firearm could benefit from that. I think, like 16-year-olds, most people progress through that fairly quickly. Once you get out of driver's ed and you actually start driving on the highway with other people, like, your real-world experience starts to be like, oh, okay, And so then there's the years of experience of driving on the highway. I think most people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, they drive in and about around public roads on their daily basis with pretty good comfort. All right. And so I think a lot of people, kind of that second phase is, I'm comfortable with my gear, but I'm getting reps. All right. So I'm getting reps on draws. I'm getting reps on reloads. I'm getting reps on whatever it is, the basic manipulation skills. They're still refining, like, where do I grab my magazine? What finger do I put? What finger do I push the magazine release button with? How much do I have to turn the gun to hit that button? Stuff like that. That's that second phase. I think a lot of people live there, stay there, and never progress. And then I think the third phase would be kind of, if you're interested enough in shooting to listen to our show, and if you're interested enough to listen to this episode, I think you're trying to get to this third phase. And this third phase would be like high performance driving. All right. So that would be like taking a driving school, like an aggressive race car driving school. All right. How do we get the most out of this thing we absolutely can to use it in some kind of application? So that aggressive dry fire, performance-based growth type dry fire is kind of that third phase. Most people never get there, and I think it's because they don't understand how to get out of the second phase, or they don't have foresight to see beyond it to get into what we're talking about here. So yeah, like when you say dry fire, people think, oh yeah, I'm going to press the trigger, feel what my trigger feels like, and I'm going to try not to move the gun. I think what we're talking about here today is moving to the skills beyond that, because like when I really started digesting a dry fire program, the concept of I don't necessarily need to snap the trigger to get feedback. Okay, that was a new level. Like there's a lot of drills that I do. The goal isn't necessarily to click a shot, after doing whatever task. It's to arrive with a sight picture on a prepped trigger.
Yeah.
So I have a cocked hammer. I'm just taking the slack out of a trigger and I'm ready to shoot without shooting. Having the control to have that shot staged and ready to go visually without actually releasing it, that's a level of control. And I think you can get that level of control to the point where, hypothetically, I don't actually do this. I don't actually do this.
I love where this is going.
I am comfortable with where my triggers are at on all my guns. I could point it at something I don't want to destroy and take the slack out of the trigger and not shoot it. I could do that. I don't do that. But that's the level of control and feel we have over how the manipulation of our triggers work through a prolonged pattern and practice of dry firing, to hone that level of feel, touch, and control over a trigger. That's what we're refining in dry fire practice.
Yeah, and interesting story that goes with this. So the third type of gun that we're talking about, a double single, is the one gun that acts a little bit differently when you're dry firing it, because when you're pressing the trigger, you're releasing it. There's spring tension against that because it's a double action trigger that has just been dropped. So it wants to go all the way back out and reset as a double action trigger. So when you're dry firing, you stay in that single action range, manipulating that trigger. But if you do a reload or you have a big movement as part of a little stage that you set up in your basement, then you come off of the trigger because you take your trigger finger off the trigger, now the trigger guard, when you're moving. So then when you go to remount the gun, you have a double action trigger again. So when I got a CZ Shadow 2, which I shot for like half a season while I was waiting for my 2011 to get more jacked up as it already is, putting a dot on it, I was shooting a CZ Shadow 2 with a dot when I moved off of iron sights. And I was dry firing down here in the basement, so I got super used to every time I did a reload or had a big movement, I got a double action trigger again, and you needed a lot more force to go through that. And I had 2 instances in matches where I would either do a reload or have a big movement, and as I remounted the gun, I would reapply that same level of trigger pressure.
Chaboom!
And I had the funny thing is, so I had ADs in both circumstances. What I knew was an AD. I didn't mean for the gun to go off. But when I say AD, I mean like 0.03 seconds sooner than I meant for it to go off. In both of those cases, I hit the thing that I was going to shoot. I just shot it a little bit early. And one of them was like a 20-yard 8-inch plate. And,
right. So bonus tip for all you listeners out there, all right? Here's one. This one's just between us, okay? Even though this is posted publicly and anyone can hear it. If you do that and it's happens in a controlled environment, just own it and make the RO stop you if they caught it. Most of the time they didn't catch it. All right, it's kind of like turn and draw. Like, oh, you're not supposed to draw your gun before you turn around. Yeah, you do that shit fast enough, they're not going to see it. So,
in both of these cases, I actually made a video about it after the fact that went into my match lessons videos that I do, and the lesson was when I say I'm squaring up and I'm getting my dot onto the target for a position entry, I'm not saying I'm pointing in the general direction of the target. I really mean my dot is on the target as I'm entering the position. So even if in these cases the gun went off prematurely and it still hit the thing that I meant to hit. So
yeah, dude, I mean, people have argued their way, like me as range master, have argued their way out of DQs because they're like, but I hit the target. Like you watch the video and it was like that was an ND all day long. And they're like, I hit a target, bro. And I'm like, well, yeah, you did, I guess.
Yep.
Welcome back to the living.
Yeah. So the other thing, so those are the mechanics of the pistol, and we're still in the driver's ed phase of the dry fire talk right now. So I don't know, hit the skip 30-second button a handful of times if you know all this, but
well, maybe we should just touch on safety protocols first. So maybe we'll start at the beginning.
That's a super valid point. I have, if we did a video podcast, you could see in the background, I have a whole bunch of dry fire targets all over my basement here. I have some dummy rounds that we'll get into later. I have absolutely no loaded ammo in the room where I dry fire. I bring a gun in with no ammo in it. I bring in empty mags. I actually just have mags that just exist in this world with dummy rounds that live in them. You want to dry fire either with dummy rounds that you loaded. So like if you reload, just reload rounds that don't have any powder or primers. If you have a buddy that reloads, have him do it and give him some money. Or with no ammo whatsoever. Ammo has a way of finding its way into guns. If you have like a couple of dedicated mags in your reloading room that are your dry fire mags, and then you're also working on a gun at the same time, and you're, chamber checking some stuff, it's really easy to just get that stuff mixed up. And I am confident that both of us know people who have shot holes in the basement of their house when they thought they were dry firing. Do not dry fire in a room where loaded rounds exist. That's kind of my personal rule.
So the specifics of whatever your system are, I don't know that those are important. I was actually watching some Jeff Cooper stuff on YouTube last night. I don't know how I got on that rabbit hole because it's very dry. But when he talked about dry fire, he's like, what's important is have a system that you do not waver from for any reason. All right. And so they would use an example like what Reiser just talked about. Okay. It happens in a room with no live ammunition. I have dummy magazines, blah, blah, blah. The specifics of your system are not important because I can contradict Reiser and say I dry fire in a room with live ammunition. However, I have a system. For example, guns that have live ammunition around them, like carry guns, I have a system for separating carry guns from match guns. Match guns don't mix with ammo until they go to a match. So I separate and segregate those things. I have dry fire magazines in a segregated place. But that there's a lot of discipline around these are the magazines I dry fire with. They have dummy ammunition in them. The dummy ammunition looks very different than live ammunition because it's very beat up at this point, so I don't know that it would even go into a chamber. Sometimes my dry fire magazines are actually in a different caliber than the gun I'm using. So like I've used 40 cal mags for a 9mm. Like there's no way that would work ever. But mag's a mag, like it fits in a double stack 1911. But have a system. Have a system, and you do not compromise on the system no matter what. Like part of my system, so I said there's live ammunition around. Part of my dry fire doctrine is I verify that the gun is unloaded for purposes of dry firing, and then once I do that, I don't rack the slide. So I don't, I only thumb cock the hammer while I'm doing it. So I have an inert magazine and I'm thumb cocking the hammer. I'm not actually racking the slide on a pistol in between. Same thing with a shotgun, because dummy shotgun ammunition, that's a whole other thing. So I use live. I don't recommend you do this. This is what I do if I'm being honest. I use live shotgun shells to practice loading with. I, under no circumstances, rack the bolt while I'm doing that. That is just an inserting shells into the gun exercise, and then they come out the bottom too. They don't go through the chamber. As an adult, that's a decision that I made. So have structure and rigid rules with yourself around what you do, because we are talking about working with live guns. They potentially, if they mix with live ammunition, a live shot will occur.
Yeah. So the key thing that understand here is no matter how you break it down, and there's a million ways to do this. When you take the 4 firearm safety rules, we are throwing out 2 of them. We're we are not treating the gun as if it's loaded because we wouldn't do any of this stuff, and we're definitely pointing it at something that we don't want to destroy. And in my case, I'm in the basement of my house. I have an underground basement. All of my walls are essentially bulletproof, other than really bad tinnitus and some spackle. Like, it's not technically going to be a huge deal, but I still don't want that to happen. So however you do it, have a way that you are absolutely sure that you're not going to accidentally shoot something.
A very famous, we'll say influencer in recent history was dry firing in their hotel room. Shot a TV with an AK.
Nice.
All right. So
is there a video of this?
I don't think so.
Oh man.
they are not in the industry anymore that I'm aware of. But they compromise on the system. They were lackadaisical with this process. Like, this is something where it's a very serious thing, even though we're breaking, quote unquote, firearm safety rules. We are doing it in a structured and professional manner, because we as intelligent people can determine that guns are unloaded. But that means there is no compromise in that process. It's kind of like if you work somewhere where you got to do lockout, tag out for safety stuff in, like, high voltage equipment or confined spaces or whatever. It's like the only way it works is if it is a rigid process that everyone follows and there are no shortcuts.
Yep. Yeah, good analogy. So whatever your process is, develop your process, making sure that it's foolproof, and then don't waver from it. Yeah, so like when I'm that's a good example, because if I'm at a match and I'm in a hotel room or in my van, obviously there's live ammo all over the place. In that case, I will just verify that my gun's unloaded, verify that all my mags are unloaded. I don't take dummy rounds to matches. But yeah, double checking all of that stuff to make sure that you are starting everything with an unloaded gun.
Yep, but like taking the live ammunition and putting it over there, wherever that would be, and then dry firing over here where we verified all that stuff. The process is more important than the pedantics of how you do it.
Yes.
You know,
100%.
Kind of like as it, like with carry guns around my house. Carry guns that are loaded are in holsters. All right. If a gun is going to not be in a holster, it needs to be unloaded. That's just a rule I made for myself. All right. So it's something like that. That is part of your system is very important for integrating dry fire into your daily routine.
Yep. So back to mechanics for the last couple pieces before we can move on to the actual fun stuff. ARs basically act like single action rifles, or single action pistols. So when you pull the trigger, you just get a dead trigger after that. So those are super easy to deal with. Shotguns are kind of their own special beast, especially if you're talking about tube guns, because a lot of shotgun practice involves loading. And especially if you have a gun like a Benelli that has, what is that button called? Like a shell release button or something?
Yeah, I believe the carrier release is the one that releases the bullet carrier. I think it's the shell release is what they call it.
Yeah. So there's 2 buttons on a Benelli. There's one on the side that is the carrier release. So that is if your bolt carrier is locked to the rear on an empty chamber, that's the button you hit to drop the bolt. The other one is the button that you hit to let a first shell out of the tube onto the lifter. It essentially does the same thing as the trigger without the firing pin striking anything. So if you are doing, an unloaded start or something like that with the Benelli, or you run a dry, at some point you have to hit that little button that's beside the trigger guard to release a shell onto the lifter. Otherwise, all of the racking in the world will not chamber around. The problem with that is when you're dry firing, when you pull the trigger, it drops a shell onto the lifter. So then when you go to do your next quad load, there's a shell on the lifter, which is in the way, which keeps you from being able to load the gun. I have been dry firing a bunch. Speaking of shotgun ammo, I just found a good friend of mine with a shotgun reloading press and paid him a sum of money to load me up a box of slug style round crimp shells, which are holding up fantastically. Thanks, Blake. And that's what I use for dry fire. So they weigh the same, they feel the same, and they're crimped the same way that you would do a slug. So they are, as far as I can tell, fairly indestructible, because I have destroyed a lot of commercially available dummy rounds. They just don't last.
They do not.
I have loaded that gun probably several hundred times a night for a month straight, and I have pulled the trigger less than a dozen times during that entire time. So and that's just because I've been setting up more and more complicated little things in the basement here, getting used to swinging along gun around stuff. And part of the thing that I do when I'm explaining dry fire to people, especially when they have like a bad habit and I'm like have them in a class and I'm fixing some habit with grip or stance or whatever it is, I'll say, hey, do your dry fire drill. And when you finish, don't do the speed unload. Finish on your last target and pause and look at everything that's happening and think, okay, am I gripping the gun the way that I would actually grip it? Am I standing the way that I should actually stand to mitigate recoil? Am I doing all of these things appropriately? So at the end of this very complicated drill that I had literally an hour ago, I was finishing up with a simulated long slug target. So I would take a shot at that long slug target and then pause after I took the shot to be like, all right, is my dot actually lined up on my vent rib, my bead? Am I actually shouldered correctly? Am I standing correctly? Like, am I getting sloppy or am I doing this correctly? And over the last month of dry fire, literally today was the first time that I ever incorporated a trigger pull into that at the end of a drill. So it was all load, and I'm moving my trigger finger. I'm kind of touching the trigger. I'm simulating shooting, but I'm not pulling it at all. Because it really doesn't matter if you're simulating shooting before you touch the trigger or through a dead trigger. Like, when you shoot, you'll shoot. Like, I don't think most people are going to go out and just like tickle the end of the trigger and not actually shoot the gun. But yeah, so when you're shooting shotguns or when you're dry firing shotguns, as a general rule, you're not actually pulling the trigger unless you have a gun that doesn't drop around onto the lifter like that.
Yeah, and I think the verbiage around this for people to understand, when the term dry fire again, like, is heavily centric, like it brings people to the pressing of the trigger and the firing pin snapping. When you progress out of that daily driver phase and into the high performance phase like that we're talking about, the importance of dry fire, like Adam and I can press a trigger without moving the gun, and we could have done that 10 years ago. Like, we don't necessarily need reps on breaking a trigger pull. The reason we're dry firing so aggressively and so frequently is because we are burning in reps to make lanolin in our subconscious so that we are pairing hand-eye coordination, all right? So that you're pairing a visual, the sight picture, with having the hands and the body in the right spot for a shot to occur. It's not necessarily actually breaking the shot. It's all the other things around the shot and getting reps and burning that into your brain as the visual conditions for a desirable shot that would have occurred here is what I just did. Reset and do that again. So that's where we're talking about, like, progressing past just pressing a trigger and getting the snap of the gun. It's not necessary for that necessarily to happen because, like Adam said, once you know how to press a trigger, you know how to press a trigger. Really what we're working on is all the other things around creating the desirable conditions for a shot and burning into our subconscious that the visual conditions for a desirable shot were present here. Label that as a success and then file that in the background.
Yeah, 100%. So I would say, I think my dry fire, as if I think of it in terms of I'm starting the off season, I'm starting to train hard for whatever's coming up. Like, what just happened this winter, right? We had PCSL 2 Gun Nationals. Everybody kind of took a bit of a break. Now we're starting to dry fire because we have matches coming up here within the next couple weeks. So my usual dry fire progression and the speed that this happens at kind of depends on how well I'm feeling with everything, what I have coming up, things along those lines. So this will vary a little bit, but as a general rule, I'm going to start with some very basic stuff. So assuming I haven't touched a gun in a month, the first things are going to be we'll talk about just pistol stuff right now, but everything kind of translates. So I'm usually going to start with some draws, and I'm going to start with some draws because uh, it's really easy. I can draw. I can put down a sub-second draw after having not touched a gun for like 6 months, and I know that I can because I did. However, my grip was poo when I did it, and your grip matters a lot. So the difference between I can snatch the gun out of the holster and have it facing generally in the direction of that target before your 1 second part time goes off, and I can snatch the gun out of the holster with an appropriate grip and appropriate stance and have my sights settle on that target in the A zone before the timer goes off is not the same thing. So I will start with some draws that don't even have a trigger press in them. What I'm trying to do is draw, get my dot on the target where I want it to be. When the timer goes off at a second, I already know that I'm on the target. I'm evaluating my grip. I'm like, okay, did I actually grip the gun the way that I wanted to? Now, this part might last 5 draws, and it might last a day, depending on how fast I pick it up. As soon as I can draw the gun again or go to a new gun or whatever, if I'm switching between platforms, I'll start here. Then I'm going to start with some reloads. For whatever reason, reloads always come pretty naturally to me. I can usually bang out fast reloads right away. I'll do a couple. Yep, they're still there. Then I'm going to start with slightly more complicated drills. So this might be like, if you think of like a classifier type thing, draw, shoot those partials, shoot that popper, shoot those things, do a reload, shoot all the things in reverse order, whatever the case may be. Then I'm going to start building like whole stages in my basement. I think that's the place. If I'm not trying to fix some like mechanical issue, like if I'm noticing that my draw or my reload or my index or whatever is jacked, that's where most of my dry fire, I would say, happens, is somewhere between small drills with multiple targets or full stages. Where are you spending most of your time at?
So when I really started putting some structure around this a few years ago, plug your ears, I was using Steve Anderson's program, and so my most intensive dry fire time is the winter season. During the winter season, I kind of set my sights, or have set my sights on some classifier goals. So that's been the last few seasons.
This might change answers quite a bit then.
Yeah, so last few seasons I've been focusing on classifier goals during the winter. And so those are heavily skills based, and he has a progression of drills. I would do half of them in one session, half of them in the other. When I'm really buckled down, trying to ramp up for something, I'm usually practicing twice a day. If one of those isn't live fire, then there's 2-a-day dry fires. But I'm really working on those minute skills. And most of that is pistol oriented, because kind of like the pistol is kind of the most perishable of all the skills, and all pistol skills really translate over into the other long guns. So it's easier to focus on that. Well, easier, but it's more effective to focus on that. And at the same time, what I lost sight of when I start to pick up the long guns, it is a lot harder to do a long gun session than it is with a pistol, because you're holding up a long gun that weighs approximately 10 pounds at arm's length for half an hour. All right, grab a 5-pound dumbbell, hold it out at arm's length, and see how long you do that. Whereas with a pistol, it's in a holster. You do a draw, you do a presentation, it goes back into the holster. So you get kind of a little break in between them. Even though it's a few seconds, it's not a sustained holding this thing out there. So I think what your question was, my routine or whatever is around, I'll do hands at sides draws, and most drills I'll do for 5 minutes. because like Anderson recommends 3 to 5 minutes. So when I'm listening to music, honestly, what I do is I do a drill for the duration of a song. Those tend to be about 3 to 4 minutes. And then when it changes, I change drills. And that also kind of helps you keep track of time, so you're not like looking at the watch all the time. So I'll do hands at sides draws. I'll do surrender draws. I'll do like El Presidente turn and draws. I'll do strong reload weak, or freestyle reload strong hand, freestyle reload weak hand, and then I kind of augment from there. Recently, I took a long vacation where I wasn't able to touch guns. My reloads got sloppier than I would like in that time, so like I've incorporated some briquette reloads, which for those not familiar, a briquette reload is basically the entire reload sequence from a sight picture to the inserting the magazine into the magwell to the point of no return. Not sticking it in all the way, but bringing it in just to the point of no return in the bottom of the magazine well, so that you get that index right. I do stuff like that. When we get closer to the action shooting season, where like, doing stages and stuff like that is more important, I have a lot of simulated targets strewn about my dry fire area, and then kind of like Riser says, I start to string them into match mode arrays. So I pick strings of them, like I do this for a little bit, and then I change it and I do that for a little bit. The arrays vary quite a bit, and I don't know that they're particularly important, but I also start to really emphasize the first step out of a position, like getting a good shot and initiating movement, and then coming to a rest from movement and initiating a shot, more so than running around. Because if we run around a lot, I feel like that just turns it into a workout. So that's not necessarily sustainable. When I'm just working on shooting skills, I'm just trying to work on the micro skills in between there, which is draws, reloads, and initiating movement, having good sight pictures around all of that stuff.
Yeah, and what I'm training, so my normal workup to a season is kind of going through the progression that I just talked about. And generally speaking, like Maxwell said, I am shooting the pistol like 90% of the time, mostly because the pistol is the one that falls off the fastest, and I'm just kind of touching up the other ones. Right now, it's about 50-50 pistol and shotgun because we got all the IPSC qualifiers coming up, and I hadn't quad-loaded a tube gun in a couple of years. But I'm building whole stages, and I'm using that as sort of my introduction to the season. And this might even be like a whole 3-gun stage in some cases. So I have a little, dump barrel thing and a dump bucket for a pistol and all that other stuff. And my whole setup, I got a bunch of like half scale and third scale targets and poppers, and painted a bunch of partials and painted some hardcover. And I stapled them all to these little like 1/2-inch thick sticks, so I can just like lean them against a wall and then just move them around all really easily. So I'll just move them around in like whatever random order, make up a quick stage. And so sometimes it might be like 2 guns worth of a stage. So like yesterday, I have a 3-gun match coming up. I'm practicing a bunch of pistol, I'm practicing a bunch of shotgun. So I would like shoot the whole stage with the pistol, dump it, pull out the shotgun, shoot the whole stage with the shotgun. So my dry fire stage was like, 40 seconds long or something like that. Once I'm into the season, I'm quite often working on stuff where I find myself lacking. So if I'm watching my match video and I'm like, wow, entries are really bad, or target transitions are really bad, or gun transitions are really bad, or whatever the case may be, if I'm finding something where I'm like, this particular skill is costing me more time than the rest, then I will sort of go backwards and I'll focus on just that skill. So I might do position entry. I might have a cone and then 8 feet of movement to a fault line where I shoot at an array, and I'll even film myself and watch myself dry fire on, do a few reps, watch the video, do a few reps, watch the video, see if I'm doing things the way that I think I'm doing them. But I will, as the season goes on, start focusing very heavily on a specific skill. And then once I feel that skill is back where I need it, then I will start going back to, more complicated stage style arrays, usually like 2 positions with some movements, because then you get movement out of the draw, a position entry, some shooting, movement out of that position, reload, another position entry, some more shooting. And then, like I said, I'll quite often just pause at the end of all of that and be like, all right, I just did all of this stuff. Did I get lazy throughout this process, or is my stance and my grip everything that I want it to be when I'm shooting an actual gun? And I'll kind of use that as my guideline if I'm getting sloppy or not.
Yeah, I kind of my priority levels, I think, in what I'm actually doing. What you actually do, I don't think matters, as long as what you're doing is being, as long as you are associating in your head with what you're doing as improvement. As long as you are in your head are saying, I'm getting better at this, from where I started to where I am at the end of a session, I got better. The actual mechanics of what you do, I don't think is particularly important. But I would prioritize it in kind of 3 levels. My first priority is familiarization with new equipment. All right. I got a new sighting system on a shotgun. All right. So reps right now are prioritized around getting good impressions and familiarization with new equipment. Second would be what Riser was just talking about there. Problem areas. All right. I recognized in the last few weeks that I've fallen off a little bit in my reload speed and consistency. So I've been working on speed and consistency of reloads. And then I would say the third one is anticipated rehearsal of known match challenges. So like if you see a match book coming up, like a couple years ago at USPSA Nationals, there was some kind of string that involved a pistol in your weak hand, a mandatory reload, and then pistol in your weak hand again. So people all of a sudden started coming up with like these weird techniques for how do you reload a pistol without transitioning it back to your strong hand, doing your normal reload and then transitioning it back. That's a known match challenge that was thrown out there, and people started rehearsing it. Or I think in 3-gun a couple years ago, somehow people were all of a sudden freaked out about empty gun reloads, like shooting the gun empty and reloading it from a quad. So how do they like charge the chamber and then put the other 3 shells in? Lots of techniques around that. It was kind of like it was floated out there that it was a known match challenge. It was coming up. People started focusing on that stuff. So and if you don't have any new equipment, it kind of toggles back and forth between known stuff coming up. Like I know in the near future I have some technical shotgun shooting that's coming up, and reload speed on shotgun is going to be important. Start mixing that into the mix. Or I have evaluated myself, and this particular skill set's not where it's at, where I want it to be at. My weak hand pistol shooting is not where I want it to be at. All right, well then you better spend some time on that to improve from where you're at. So that's kind of the 3 areas I toggle around on prioritizing exactly what you got to do. But I think that's part of being an intermediate to an advanced level shooter, is constantly troubleshooting your skill set. Everybody's a little bit different, but I think it's recognizing in yourself the areas where you can get better and then devising a way to improve upon them. Where I think a lot of people are kind of like looking for permission to work on something. Like they don't know. They're like, just tell me what to do. And it's like, well, what are you not good at? Everything. Okay, well, that's where you sign up for, like a Joe Farewell Dryfire club or whatever is if you're looking for direction, kind of like in the world of workouts. I am not interested in physical fitness like at all. I like to work out. I will do it. I just don't want to figure out what I need to do. So I am willing to hire a trainer to say, this is what you do. Okay. But I could just as easily figure that out for myself. I just haven't had the interest. And the problem with shooting is there aren't very many coaches that can give you something to do. There are a few, but it's most productive within yourself to be able to troubleshoot yourself as to where do I need to improve, and then you have a roadmap for what you need to replicate in your dry fire range to get reps on.
Yeah, I think learning how to look at your own match footage and have a realistic understanding of what skills need improving and what skills, if you improved, would actually lead to the greatest return on investment in terms of effort, is a skill set that is super important as you get into like the higher level shooter. As you know, as a beginner, it's super like, oh, hey, I dropped a shell on every other quad load. I should practice quad loading. When you have a match where you finish 98% and you look at your match footage, you're like, shit, that was all pretty good and I still lost. Then you like, it starts to get harder and harder to figure out where to put in that effort. And it's definitely figuring out where to put in that effort, like, is a skill set in and of itself.
But nobody has said that ever. Nobody has ever finished 98% of the match and said, like, man, I was pretty good. I don't know where I lost. Like, every single person has been like, oh, it was that place where I didn't tie my shoes tight enough, and then I sneezed between weapon transitions, and that's what cost me the match.
No, I have.
Oh, you have?
I even when Ben Steger had his first podcast where it was just him talking into a microphone and answering people's questions, I sent him in a question because I shot 98.6. I remember the fucking number. I shot 98.6% of Brian Nelson at hard as hell and got second, and looked at my match footage and I'm like, I shot really good and I don't know what to improve except do everything better. And I sent that question into him. So I have. So there.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. You're so pessimistic. Yeah. I would figure you'd have just a laundry list of stuff you messed up, and you would have like a shopping cart full of dry fire things for the next day.
No, and I think part of it is, at that point, this is like I think that was 2016. Yeah, I think that was 2016. That part of me wasn't as developed yet. Like I wasn't quite at the point where I could look at it and be like, ooh, that was a thing and that was a thing. Because the other thing is it's super hard, like hard as hell. Nobody looks at a hard as hell stage and be like,
drink.
Nailed it. Like, yeah. So that was a big part of it where it's like, oh, every stage looks like chaos the entire time. Which one of these things actually mattered and which one didn't? It was super hard to tell. But yeah, I have done that, and I've been that person. So yeah,
it's weird because I think we're at a point too where like you get some of that clarity on, you're comfortable with some of your skills where they're at, that you can kind of take a breath and look around. Like on some of the USPSA stuff right now, like as we talk about going for classification goals, like some of those shoot, reload, shoot things, a lot of them, if you do the math on the numbers, it's basically a 1-3 draw and a 1-3 reload and quarter splits is what you got to do. And then it's like, oh, well, that doesn't seem so hard. Where like at more of a novice level, it just seems like you got to go as fast as possible and like as fast as my hands can crash together. And it's some unfathomable speed. Once you get past that point, I guess it's maybe a little bit easier to troubleshoot your skill sets. When I watch match video of myself right now, all I see is Herman Munster running around. All right, yeah. You Gen Xers, you're welcome. Yeah, that's like for me. What I see is movement. So a lot of my stuff is refined around or focused around the minutia of movement in a stage.
Yeah. So good example of this. A few years ago, I noticed whenever I'd come into a position with a lot of heat, I would almost always drop a shot. Like assuming there was some steel or some hard cover or something like that was kind of tight, I would watch match footage and be like, oh man, I dropped a shot in that position. I'd run to another position. And our matches here, they do a lot of hard leans around corners, things along those lines. So it's, you're often running flat out for 10 yards and then coming to a very stopped position and then taking some hard shots. And the thing that I noticed after watching the footage a few times throughout the course of like half a season was, every time I'm coming in position, I'm coming in too hot. My momentum is carrying me forward and I'm ending up with air underneath the heel of my rear foot. So if I'm moving left to right and I'm planting my right foot as my lead foot, shooting into a position around a wall or something, then I'll be up on my toes on my left foot. And I'm like, oh, I'm shooting all these positions on one foot. And so not only did it lead to me missing shots, but it also led to me having to do a drop step out of all these positions, which also added a bunch of time. And so I noticed that, and then all of my dry fire for like months was basically a fault line on the left, a fault line on the right, a little bit of a lean, or, kind of a tight wall on both sides. And it was run over there, take my shots, run to the other side, take my shots, run to the other side, take my shots, running back and forth. And then looking at the footage to say, okay, am I staying low as I'm coming into position, or are my shoulders coming up because I'm coming in medium and then my momentum is carrying me up and I'm standing up on my toes? Like when I finish each one of those position entries and I'm shooting at the targets, am I actually in like a planted shooting stance, or am I just leaning out around this wall sending hopers? So that was a really good example of like, I'm watching my match footage. And when I say match footage, I mean like third person video of you where you can see everything to your feet. Hat cam doesn't count. Hat cam looks super cool, but I don't think you can diagnose a whole lot with hat cam. So I was able to watch that match footage, come up with a training plan to fix that problem. And now it's something it'll creep up every once in a while, but it's pretty darn rare. Like I've pretty much put that one to bed. So that's the kind of stuff that you're looking for. Like as the season goes on, it's like, what skill sets can I work on in the basement that if I put time into them, are they going to give me the most value for my time in terms of match performance on the other side?
Absolutely. And I'm like Adam said, 2 reasons to video yourself. 1, arbitration. 2 is to troubleshoot your skill sets. Everything you see about yourself that makes you not want to post that video on Instagram, that's the stuff you need to work on. You'll know it when you 100%. See it.
Yeah, 100%. So volume-wise, I've noticed that I get a lot more out of regular short sessions than I do if I just go into the basement and flog myself for like 2 hours. If I dry fire for 2 hours, just throw away an hour and a half of that.
A 2-hour dry fire session is the equivalent of going to the range and shooting 2,000 rounds of ammo in one go.
Yep.
Or even 1,000. 100%. Even 1,000. At some point, you're going through the motions. So you want it to be aggressive. You want it to be focused. And then you want to be out. The second you're not focused anymore and aggressive, it's time to quit. That's why a lot of times, like when I'm really buckling down, it will be 2 sessions and not one big session. It'll be a morning and an evening instead of a really big morning or a really big evening. Because it's better. I don't know very many people that can really, at a high level, are really aggressively dry firing more than a half hour or an hour at a time. Yeah,
and even right now when it's like full winter lockout, all the ice climbing's kind of bad, so I haven't been ice climbing. Like I had a day today, honestly, was the day. Nothing to do. It's super cold outside. There was a match yesterday, which I didn't shoot because I just didn't feel like it. I couldn't get into the armory to go shoot live fire because they were all booked out. So I'm like, well, I got nothing to do. I'm just hanging out all day. So ran a few errands of stuff, but I was rewatching a season of Drive to Survive. For anybody who hasn't watched that on Netflix, it's fantastic. And I'd literally just like, okay, I'm just going to train all day. Well, what does training all day look like? Well, I did my workout and I did the things that I want to do. And then I'd dry fire. And then I'd watch an episode, 50 minutes. And then I'd come back down and dry fire. Then I'd go watch another episode. Then I'd come back down and dry fire. Then I'd go watch another episode. And that was like kind of my whole day. Was like, I'd watch a 50-minute episode because that was my break. And then I would come down and I'd dry fire super focused for like 15 to 20 minutes. And when I was tired and I felt myself losing focus and I was just, throwing mags into the air because I was missing and everything else, then I would stop and I would go back up and I would just go watch another episode. And when that episode was done, I went back down to the basement and dry fire. Now, that's not something I normally do, but that is what a quote unquote all day dry fire session looks like for me, is like 15-minute sessions broken out with an hour of something else.
In my formative years, I definitely did a lot of that, of watching TV whilst dry firing, and I was dry firing at the TV. Actually got some advice from then somebody who was much better than me. He would try to dry fire at a face on TV, not for any sinister reason, but because a face is not on your television screen very long. So like he would try to draw and get a good sight picture on a face on the news of whatever, and snap a good shot on that face before it would disappear. And a lot of times they weren't there very long. So a lot of my formative years, yeah, I would be watching whatever my show was, and I would be dry firing with my single stack gun and my IDPA gear. I don't do that anymore. There's no TV in my dry fire area. It's in the gym portion of my house, so there's targets in my gym, essentially. I'm a big proponent of the 5 a.m. club. All right, so the mandatory cannot skip dry fire session is the first thing I do in the day. And for everyone who's like, I don't have enough time, yeah, you do. You know what you got to do. Get up early. So I get up, and it's the first thing I do for the day, and it's about, I would say it's 35 to 45 minutes of focused dry fire, and then I actually do my physical workout, and then I start my day. And then the second session would be after work. Right now, that has been a live fire session for a little bit, just had time and resources and availability to do it. When that goes away, that will be a dry fire session again. Or as I start to, my job takes me out on the road here for most of the year. So when when I don't have access to a range in the evening, it'll be a dry fire session. That same kind of 35 minutes in the evening, working on something maybe a little bit different than I was doing before.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up live fire because that reminded me. To me, the difference between live fire and dry fire, except that live fire is significantly more expensive, I pretty much treat live fire for the most part as confirmation of dry fire practice.
Yes.
So I'm really just thinking of live fire. Like, honestly, I get more value out of dry fire than I do out of live fire because you can just do so many more reps. If you are doing something catastrophic to your sight picture while you're pressing the trigger or something along those lines, you can see it very easily because the gun isn't moving under recoil. So what I'm doing is I'm dry firing, and then I am taking that skill to live fire when I have time and opportunity, and doing more or less the same thing and seeing if the results are what I expect. And one of the interesting things I've done with so I do these classes at the Armory about once a month during the winter. It's just like the free Armory class on Thursdays. And, people come out, do it. It's a very short, like 2-hour thing with like 8 people. And we just have like a little mini clinic on something. And I did one on dry fire, and we basically had dry fire targets taped to the walls on the outside walls of the range. And then we had exactly the same setup downrange for live fire. And we were talking about how to dry fire. And I was like, all right, if you're doing this correctly, you should be able to dry fire this drill with an empty gun facing the half scale targets on the wall, and then turn, make ready, set off a timer, and shoot the same time and the same points at the live fire target facing downrange. That's really what I'm looking for. I'm like, are the things that are happening in a live fire the same as the things that are happening in a dry fire? Because that's a spot where, a lot of dry fire is just not lying to yourself for extended periods of time. And it's really easy to lie to yourself. Shoot some drill and come out and be like, yep, nailed it. All alphas. Like, really? Are you sure?
The point of live fire practice is to call bullshit on your dry fire if it's applicable. I firmly believe if you are buying your own ammunition, which is, let's face it, all of you, if you're buying your own ammunition, every shot you take owes you something. And you should learn something from it. But really what you're going to get the most yardage out of in live fire is confirming things that you have learned the hard way in dry fire. So just confirming that, yep, I can actually do that at this pace, or nope, that's not at this pace. I need to refine what I'm doing in dry fire more. But you shouldn't have big technique or execution epiphanies in live fire. Those should happen in dry fire, and then you take it to the range to see, can I do that for real? Well, not can I do that for real, confirming I can do that for real. That is the most productive way to do that. But, and then also kind of, it should also square in your head, like, you should be, I don't know, what would you say, Adam? I would say you should be 10 to 20% more aggressive in dry fire than in live fire, because there's no actual shot or recoil. So you're not going to be able to take one for one what you can do limited human function in dry fire to live fire. You kind of got to square that difference. And then also kind of overtraining. If you're training beyond what you can actually do in live fire, when you bring it to the match and you throttle it back 5% so that you feel like you're being conservative, you are actually executing at a refined level, and you're not out on the ragged edge of your skill set.
Yeah, I disagree with 10 to 20%. I think draws, reloads, position entries, and target transitions should all be the same. I think the only spot where your dry fire should actually be faster than your live fire, or rather that your live fire should be slower than your dry fire, is in targets past, let's say, 7 or 8 yards. I think inside of that, everything should be reasonably the same. I think for me, the difference is, your gun is going to recoil and come back, and you're going to have some refinement of sight picture that will soak up a few hundredths of a second. So if your dry fire splits are 16s at that, 12, 14 yard target, your real world splits are going to be, 22, something like that. Maybe a little bit sportier, but you should lose a few hundredths, like in the neighborhood of 500ths to maybe a full tenth, depending on how far a target is on the split to that second shot. But like, let's say I'm shooting an L Pres dry fire. My live fire L Pres should be within a couple tenths of that. I can see Maxwell's gears turning.
A little bit. Partially, things our audience should know is all my math numbers are made up. Where I think Reiser actually does the math on it. It just I think he and I described the same split difference, but it wasn't actually 20%.
You said percentage, where I think you meant.
I was
hundreds.
parroting. I was parroting something I heard from someone else.
Well, here's a good example. So, and this is one of those spots where really, really having dry fire that's very accurate to your live fire can make a huge difference. I've had several part-time stages. So Barry Steel Open down here is a big steel match they do in St. George every year, and a third of the stages are part-time steel stages. So they're generally set up where you can't quite shoot everything, but everything might be worth different values. So they got small targets that are worth more points than big targets. In this one case, there was a spinner towards the end of a stage, and the spinner was worth a bunch of points, but if you were like super close to spinning it and then the buzzer went off, you got none of those points. So it was an all or nothing, like full roll of the dice gamble. And so I took out my phone, I hit the buzzer, and I essentially air gunned. I didn't have a gun in my hands, but I essentially dry fired the stage the way that I would shoot it and be like, oh, there's a couple extra targets in there. And I took out a couple targets and I did it again, dry fired the spinner. And I came up with a target combination that had, as many targets as I thought I could get before the spinner, and then going to the spinner. And in reality, so the way part-time stages work is if your last shot is within 3/10 of the buzzer, then that shot counts. So if the part-time is 20, the actual part-time is 20.3 seconds. Make sense? So I shot this stage. The buzzer went off as I pressed the trigger on my last round, which turned the spinner. So my dry fire time of this like 20-second 5-position stage was within 3/10 of what my live fire time ended up actually being when I was all said and done. And so I've been able to, because I've developed this skill over time, I've been able to use this skill to like break down different stage plans. So I'll literally just take, the stopwatch thing on my watch and air gun a stage plan, and then reset and air gun a totally separate stage plan, and whichever one has the fastest time, that's the one that wins, because I can be very honest with myself about what kind of splits are going to be on those far targets and what this position entry is going to look like and all those other things.
Yeah, it works both ways. You can, if you need to find time on your skill set, like if you're not at a level you want to be at, if you have an accurate perception of your live fire to dry fire speed, you can push yourself in one or the other. Or like Adam's saying, if Riser, sorry, person who knows who they are,
we've gotten some feedback on calling each other Adam.
Yeah, right. What Riser's talking about is like if you have a realistic, gauge of what your pace is when you're dry fire, when you're walking through scouting stages, you can be like, yeah, that's worth it, that's not worth it. Me 10 years ago, I'd have been like, oh man, they're wizards, how do they even know that? Like, why wouldn't I try it? And they're like, no, they can just accurately assess, like, oh yeah, that's worth it, that's not worth it. But I think what you're working towards is, or what you need to have is, if your goal is a 6-second L-Pres and you dry fire it in 3 seconds and you actually shoot it in 10 seconds, you got to deconflict it somewhere there. The reason you're live firing is to call bullshit on your dry fire, all right? So if you're dry firing it in 3 seconds, you're not executing everything. Like, I don't know, maybe you're not actually pushing the magazine release button, you're just stuffing a mag in there. Or you're not seeing a real sight picture like you would on a live fire target. Or if you're like, man, I am stuck at 7.5 seconds and I can't figure it out, in dry fire, you can start to mirror, okay, well, here's what 7.5 seconds feels like, and then find a 10th, and then find a 10th, and then find a 10th. You can take a 10th off of anything, all right? Just shave it a 10th at a time. And we haven't really gotten to that part yet, but you can,
that's a good point. You
can mirror what you do in real life and then start cutting pieces off of it. And so that's how essentially, I think once I started doing this dry fire program that I talked about, when I first started my dry fire L-Pres, or, whatever abbreviated version of whatever this drill was, let's say my time was 7 seconds. That was the best I could do for whatever reason. Well, you start taking pieces off of it within a short amount of time. I mean, like within 3 weeks, I cut 3 seconds off that thing. All right. But I only did it a 10th at a time. I didn't try to cut 3 seconds off it. I tried to cut a 10th off of it today. And then a 10th off of it today. And then like, well, no, I didn't get that 10th. Okay, it took me a week to get another 10th. But then a 10th, and a 10th, and a 10th, and a 10th. And you keep dropping it down. So incrementally you get better. You don't try to eat the whole elephant at one time.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and there's a few places to look for these. So, everybody wants a sub-second draw. Everybody wants a sub-second reload. That's pretty easy to set your times for that. I used to work out of one of the Steger books, which has a bunch of par times. I have at certain points set up classifiers in my basement and just figured out like what a GM time looks like and just set that as the par time and done it. These days, because I've done it enough and I have a pretty good just kind of like internal understanding of like what fast feels like. And especially when it comes to things like I'm going to set up a whole stage. I'll use my timer as the start signal, but that's it. Sometimes if I'm trying to really push it, what I'll do is I'll use my timer to start signal. I'll shoot that whole stage. I have a little ELS clip on my timer, so it just clips from my belt. When I'm done shooting the stage, I'll just look down and see what the time was, and I'll set it for, a half a second less than that, because that's how long it took me to, look down at the thing. And then I'll start taking time out of that. So I'll have like a starting time for this stage, and then I'll do the same thing. I'll just start pulling out a 10th or a couple tenths at a time and see how much I can drive that down, and see like at what point, like, okay, I can now shoot this thing in 3.8, but let's be real, none of those sight pictures were there, and I'm no longer gripping the gun the way that I want to. Pro tip: if you live in a house with your wife and she doesn't want to listen to the sound of a 120 decibel frickin' pack timer going off every once in a while, I actually just take a foamy and roll it up and stick it in the microphone hole in those things, and then it's a nice little boop. So
that is a very valuable tip. I was actually going to get around to that as well. On the AMG timer, just the way our house is laid out, the quietest setting on an AMG timer, no matter where I am in our basement, will still wake up my significant other. And so sometimes more than others, but like recently I kind of also, we could get into this too, but like I kind of have two different, again, parroting this book. I have kind of a execution mode of Dryfire where I'm working on refinement of the actual technique and getting the technique right. And then I have a speed mode where I have the technique, I'm trying to get it faster. And I toggle back and forth between them because sometimes in chasing the speed, you get sloppy on the finite details. So I jump back and forth. So recently I have negated the waking up the lady by just not using a timer and focusing on execution in the morning. The other thing I'll do with timers, especially in hotels where I don't care what anybody around me thinks, I'll do more sense. I'll like lay out. I have like the traveling deck of Dryfire targets. The one I'm using right now is a oversized deck of cards, like playing cards, and I'll strewn those about the room whatever makes sense for that day. And essentially I'll set myself a par time of whatever, and then my drill is to leave acceptable shots for that amount of time. So I set it for 5 seconds, and I just jump back and forth between whatever these 5 targets are, hit a reload, and it just keep going for 5 seconds. And then eventually it gets to a point where it's like, all right, well, I can get back and forth between these 5 targets 3 times. I'm going to try to get through it and then get another target. Like, what do I have to shave down to get an additional target? So I kind of have this varying array and kind of leaving acceptable shots. And if you shoot a bad shot, making it up again, that's another skill.
100%. If you shoot misses in Dryfire, make those up.
Right.
Like train yourself to be like, that was a bad sight picture and I'm just going to send another one.
Yep. So like speed mode speed mode Adam applies to both of us. If we're just trying to go for speed, all right, well, we're going to give up on accuracy a little bit because we're refining the pace at which this all happens. When we're buckling down and getting ready for matches, you got to program in making up a bad shot. So calling a shot, seeing a bad sight picture, and then going back and getting a good scoring hit. Because that's another skill. You can call a bad shot and make it up faster than you can see a miss on paper or see a steal not fall. All right, people who make up steal really fast, they didn't wait for the ding. All right, they saw a bad shot and they shot again. You can do that in the span of 15 or 20, whereas like to see, hear, process all that's more like 30 or 40.
You might have already started leaving the position.
Yeah.
That's always fun.
So learning what a bad shot looks like is as important as learning what a good shot looks like, and then programming your subconscious that when I see subprime shots, I got to go back and make that one up. Even on some of the classifiers in like the USPSA system, even though it's heavily penalized in Virginia count, if you make up a miss with an alpha, you can beat the penalty. So, but you have to have that skill set of calling a bad shot and making it up with an alpha immediately.
Yep. Yeah, and to kind of start wrapping it up here, I think what Maxwell just touched on was a really good thing too, that there's different modes of Dryfire. So there is a skill development mode. Like when I learned how to quad load, I wasn't setting par times and any of that. Like none of that was happening. It was like, okay, how do I grab these 4 shells and peel them off this caddy without ending up with just a bunch of Skittles in my hand? And then how do I put in the first 2 and how do I put in the second 2? So you're just learning the technique. And then, I might do some really slow draws, like the sort of draw that you do, during your make ready, or the draw that you do at the safe area, during a USPSA match or something like that. I'm not generally busting out full speed draws with the make ready, right? So
you should not
I might
bust out full speed draws at the make ready.
and so I might even start my dry fire session. I'll kind of make ready my dry fire session. Like I'll actually have the mags in my belt and everything, and I'll start with an under from my gun, and I'll pull it out, and I'll go through my whole make ready routine, and that's how I actually start my dry fire session. And just kind of training my mind to get into that space. But so there is a skill development process where you're just learning a skill from scratch. There's no time involved. Then there is a speed component where there is time involved. And then at some point, depending on what your schedule looks like, I might have a few dry fire sessions leading up to a match that are my match mode dry fire sessions, where it's like I'm going to build whole stages or very complicated drills, and my goal is to nail this entire thing 10 times without messing up. I'm going to turn down the speed a little bit. I'm going to shoot the stage or the drill or whatever it is at the pace that I would shoot it in a match, trying to find that balance of aggression with points. And I don't want to actually mess up anything. So going through the whole thing, nailing the reload every single time, and being like, yep, I just did that 10 times in a row without messing up. I'm feeling pretty good about this match coming up. Where I find that if I'm trying to beat some par time on some drill and I'm dry firing that up until Friday, and then I go to the match on Saturday, I tend to come into stage one with way too much aggression, and quite often doesn't end well. So I'll usually use my last session or two leading into a match to kind of turn it down to match mode just a little bit.
Yeah, rehearsing known match challenges, if you know what they are. I think the big takeaway here is, as long as you're progressing your skills, like most of what we've been talking about is progressing your skills, the most important part of dry fire is to do it, and to do it regularly. You're normalizing having the gun in your hand, especially if guns aren't part of what you do. Like, I've been in the industry now for over 10 years, so it is fairly normal for me to handle guns throughout the day on a daily basis. If that's not you need to normalize the gun being in your hand. That's what you need to do. So that's why you need to ritualize this every day. And that is why 2-a-day dry fire is so powerful, because it amplifies that to another exponential level. And what that does for you is puts your limit of human function skill level on demand. All right? Because it's so normal, it allows you to access that skill bank without conjuring up a whole bunch of demons. Or it's a comforting thing, right? So, like, if you get super nervous when it's your turn to shoot, it's so ritualized for you to make ready because you dry fire every day. This is how, whatever ritual, like, picture a baseball pitcher, whatever their, like, wind up is, right? Like that, you're essentially ritualizing your wind up. And if you are nervous, because most people are, even Riser and I are when we make ready, if you care about the result, the ritual is kind of what helps you center yourself and find some calm in the eye of the storm. So the most important part is to do it, and do it on a regular basis. Just like working out or physical fitness, set a realistic goal as to what that means for you to accomplish the goals that you want. All right. 2-a-day, 7 days a week is not realistic for you, unless it is. But I'm guessing if you're listening to this show, it's not. It's not for me. All right. But set a goal, set a written training schedule, like commit to yourself. This is what I'm going to do. And then try to do that, whatever it is for you. And doing it 10 minutes a day on some regular basis is better than doing it for an hour on Sunday. It's 100%. It's more important to get repetitive reps of gearing up and getting into the place where you get sight pictures and press triggers on a regular basis than binge watching, the shooting process on Saturday because it's Saturday and I do my shooty stuff. So it's more important to do it on a regular basis and do it in some kind of ritualized fashion. And doing anything is better than doing nothing.
Yep, 100%. I got nothing else to add.
And keep it interesting. Keep it interesting. Like when when Riser and I talk about toggling back and forth, that's also keeping it interesting. All right, we're getting to the point now where I'm kind of tired of dry fire and El Presidente. Like I'm going to start doing some other stuff. But as soon as that stuff gets boring, I'll hitch on to something else that I want to improve on. Keep it fresh. Keep it interesting. I'll even plug it Dry Fire King on YouTube and Patreon. That's another thing. It's on your TV, and they kind of set up some props and stuff like that. Keep it interesting. Or like, the dry fire gizmos that you can buy. I don't know, we even talked about this. This might be a whole other thing, but like I don't see any value in a Mantis system or any of those other dry fire products unless they make dry fire interesting for you. If they make it interesting enough for you to do it, then by all means.
Yeah, that's where I am with those as well. I mean, back in our day, it was airsoft. People would dry fire airsoft in their basement. Like, oh, it simulates recoil and the slide's moving and the sights are moving. It's like, I mean, yeah, kind of. I've played around with some of that stuff and never bought any of them. But is it better than not dry firing? Definitely.
Yeah.
By a lot.
Yeah.
Is it better than regular dry firing? I don't know. Maybe for some people, but I never found the value in it. But if that's the thing that gets you to dry fire, then sure, go for it. That sounds great. Yeah,
I wore out an Atlas gun dry firing, all right? They just put a new hammer and sear in it because I dry fired it so many times. That's how much you want to do this, all right?
Yeah, exactly. You should be breaking parts. Well, sweet. I got nothing else. It sounds like Maxwell is all out of stuff.
Yeah,
and,
Multi-Gun Nationals registration's open.
Plug it.
Go get signed up for that. The more you sign up, the more deals I can work to get you discounts on survival stuff you'll need while you're there. So currently negotiating match packs of ammo and delicious food. So head on over there and get signed up if you are going to join us in July. And then right behind it, we're going to have a shotgun qualifier and a falling steel match in August. That will be going. Well, by the time this episode comes out, that will be live as well.
Yep. Looking forward to that. I'm very happy the falling steel thing is happening with the shotgun match. It's going to make it awesome. And I heard rumors of a live podcast during that. I think they're just rumors, but we'll see. Maxwell seems to think that they're not rumors.
I think, yeah. I mean, A1's going to be there, so I don't know if A2 is going to leave me hanging or what.
Well, if A1 figures out some logistics for this, A2 will be more than happy to partake.
Don't get technical, darling.
Hey, I have to do all the other logistics. I'm the one that edits all this shenanigans, so you're going to turn live on me? No, that's you're into that one.
I'm talent, baby.
You're talent. Yeah, right. Well, I'll tell you what, when you start beating me, then you're talent.
Pride cometh before the fall.
It does. All right, folks. Well, keep your overlays handy. This has been On the Perf.